It's no secret that the political landscape in America has been rocked by political tragedy, violence, and breaking political news this past month. But what if I told you that that doesn't have to be the way forward in America or in any nation? What is civility? Can our American people come back to the concept of civility? And what is a potential way forward for American politics in 2024 and beyond? The Honorable Jeff Coleman, principal of Churchill Strategies and author of the book With All Due Respect, joins us to talk about those questions and more. That's all coming up right here, right now. I'm Sam Chen, and this is Face the Issues. Good evening and welcome to Face the Issues. I'm Sam Chen. The last month in American politics has been something that the American people have not seen since perhaps the election of 1968. An assassination attempt on former President Donald Trump, followed by President Joe Biden announcing he's withdrawing from the presidential election, all the reaction that came after it, and both parties and their leaders asking for the American people to, quote, lower the temperature of their political rhetoric. But what does that mean? Is it doable for prolonged periods of time? What is this concept of civility, and should we pursue it? And if we should, how do we do that? We're joined by our good friend, the Honorable Jeff Coleman, former member of the Pennsylvania House of Representatives, author of the book With All Due Respect, Recovering the Manners and Civility of Political Combat, and the founder and principal of Churchill Strategies. Jeff, welcome back to Face the Issues. Thank you so much for joining us. You bet, Sam. I'm glad we're having this conversation again. It's pretty timely. Agreed. And it's, again, thank you. This has been something that, you and I have talked about these things before in general terms, but certainly in the events of this past month really makes this a timely issue, unfortunate one that we need to come back to at this point. Jeff, let me start with this question. We talk about incivility in politics a lot, and everybody does. All sides talk about this. But is there a logical jump from kind of the name calling that we're used to? You know, we hear Snowflake and Sleepy Joe. Is there a logical jump from that to what we saw in Butler, Pennsylvania, with an assassination attempt of President Trump? And if that's not a logical progression, how do we get from name calling to political violence? Well, first of all, I think you have to accept the premise that everybody is capable of doing very bad things, that you put everyone in the right kind of boiling pot of their own incoming, their social media feeds, what they're reading, what they're not reading, put people in isolation, make sure you have no close friends, you don't attend church, you don't show up for Thanksgiving dinner, you don't check on your neighbors, you're not in community. You really become a prisoner of your own mind. And I think that's what's happening all across the country, where people feel artificially connected because they see a political candidate, Democrat, Republican, kind of espousing their views, say, hey, that guy is talking the way that I would talk if I had the microphone. But instead of talking about those ideas or debating them or doing anything with them, it's just a boiling internal frustration. And every now and then you see it leak out on social media. And then tragically, every now and then somebody takes it to a logical conclusion, which is if you really hate somebody deep in your heart because of what you've been convinced of that they will do, they will destroy the country, they will destroy your way of life, then violence is the ultimate outgrowth of that. Those, like you mentioned, those little name calling back and forth, those are little hints, those are tremors. But it's really the hot boil fomenting that's going on in the human heart, that's going on, sadly, in hundreds of thousands of homes right now. Jeff, that's a great point. Let me ask you about civility. You've written a book about it. I wanted to talk about how we define it. And Teresa Bejan, scholar at Oxford University, has written a wonderful book called Mere Civility. And in there, she argues that in American politics especially, civility has really become equal to politeness. And the idea that if we're just polite to people, we pat them on the shoulder, we kind of tap gloves, in the ring before we do battle, that we've accomplished our goal. And in your book, you suggested that civility has to mean something more than rules of decorum. Could you expand on that? What is civility? How do you see it? And why is that different from politeness and decorum? And why is that important?
So it's boxing, it's UFC, it's baseball, it's any sport where there is a winner and a loser. There have to be rules, and the rules of civility and decorum, which have been laid out for generations, really since the founding of the country, says that we're going to come to these issues with very different viewpoints. We're going to feel very strongly about, you pick the issue, one side or the other. There's going to be a coin toss. One person is going to go one way, the other person is going to go the other. But then how do we resolve the issue? And if we actually want to resolve the issue, where do we take it? In this country, we have said we will take it to the ballot box. We'll take it to a place where we'll pick someone to represent the majority position. And so civility is much more about the fence around the argument than it is just, hey, be nice, take it easy. Hey, don't get in my face about that. It's much, much deeper than that. It's the boxing gloves that allow you to have very difficult conversations, but say, in the end, we're still going to be Americans. I'm still going to be your neighbor. We might even go to church together. We might even go on a date together. We might go bowling together. Sadly, we're doing none of those things.
Jeff, you brought up a point here that it's not just that politeness idea, that this is what allows us to do combat. In fact, your book's subtitle is Recovering the Manners and Civility of Political Combat. Yeah. That you're acknowledging that this it's a match, it's a combat, it's a competition. Right. And in the midst of that, there are this idea of civility. Right. One of the concerns I've raised in my academic research over the years is that we've started to see civility as an end instead of a prerequisite, as a means to this combat. Is it an end? Is it a means? I think a lot of people start to focus on civility at the cost of the ideas that we debate. How do you see those two links, civility and the very real differences that we have with people?
I guess maybe put this in human terms. This isn't anything that I've ever experienced, but a lot of my friends have experienced, and that is a divorce. When two people are going into a conversation with a negotiator, a divorce master, and they're deciding where we're going to divvy up the house, the assets, the car, who gets the boat, who gets the cabin on the lake. What we're doing in America is we're almost saying to the other Americans on the other side, we are going to divorce. There's not going to be, this is beyond any human resolution. So that's where you hear people, Sam, begin to talk about, well, why don't we just divide the country and carve it up and have separate enclaves for people that believe different things? The idea, for example, of William Penn, founder of Pennsylvania, was very, very different. It was the notion that you could have very different competing ideas about the nature of God, about man, about what man's responsibility is to his neighbor, and you could have those same religious institutions, those same churches on opposite sides of the street. And you weren't dividing up by ethnic lines, you weren't dividing up by political lines, but you were having those people live in the same communities. But there was a place, a church, maybe a political party, where that expression of your ideas, the people you hang out with, you could refine and learn those ideas. Then you'd go out, leave the church, leave the political meeting, and persuade your neighbors that your idea is better. Come over to mine. If they didn't, you didn't hold a gun to their head. You didn't coerce them. You didn't force them as a matter of, if you want to live in our neighborhood, you have to believe this way. We're really at the point where Americans are now saying, I don't want to be married to the other half of the country anymore. In fact, we don't even recognize you as being in our country or a part of the origins of our country. And that's not okay. It's not a good place to be.
Yeah. Jeff, a lot of people would hear that and say, no, but they've gone so far that it's what we have to do. How do you respond to that?
Well, both sides are saying that. If you listen, for people who are not evangelical Christians, listen to how people describe evangelical Christians. Listen how evangelical Christians describe people who are not evangelical Christians. I mean, they're all saying, if you follow this path, you are going to destroy the essence of the country. Now, we've said that before. I remember when Barack Obama was elected, Bill Clinton was elected, Republicans said it's the end of the country. Democrats, when George W. Bush, George H.W. Bush, Ronald Reagan got elected, said it's the end of the country. So we have been at breaking points, inflection points before. But I don't think we have ever really believed that there was going to be kind of a repeat of the aftermath or the prelude to the Civil War. Yeah. We're at a point now where some of the same rhetoric in our social media feeds is with some adjustments for time and language, very similar to the language people were using in those years leading up to the Civil War. It's a strange language, and it's ugly.
Yeah. Jeff, we're going to go to the break. When we come back, I want to talk about how we can actually go about lowering that temperature, who's responsible for doing that, and a few other things like that. So don't go away. We'll be right back.
Face the Issues is produced and recorded in the studios of Lighthouse TV. Positively different.
Welcome back to Face the Issues. Again, my guest is the Honorable Jeff Coleman. Jeff, thank you again for being here, for joining us. I want to pick up right where we left off. You actually were talking about how we've been at this kind of inflection point. We've been at several inflection points before, but at this severity, you likened it to the Civil War. And it's interesting, in prepping for this, I actually wrote down Lincoln's famous quote from that first inaugural, where he says, "We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic cords of memory stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave to every living heart and hearthstone all over this broad land will yet swell in the chorus of the Union, when again touched, as surely they will be, by the better angels of our nature." I want to ask you about this, because after the assassination attempt on former President Donald Trump in Butler, Pennsylvania, both parties started calling for a lowering of the temperature. The Republican National Convention, many of those speakers changed their speeches. President Trump specifically said, "I'm only going to say Joe Biden's name one time in my speech." What does that look like to lower the temperature? Again, to your point earlier, this isn't just a politeness. If we're really going to engage civility, it can't just be a catchphrase where we say we have to reject political violence, we have to lower the temperature. What does that actually look like?
Well, first of all, politicians, as you know, as a political consultant, generally use that call for civility or decorum or lowering the temperature as a test to see if their audience is feeling a little sensitive. We're in the wake of an attack, shooting, some tragic event. You'll notice often candidates will pull their negative ads down for 24 or 48 hours. Everybody kind of breathes a sigh of relief and says, well, why don't you do it the day before a tragedy? Why don't you stop and lower the temperature before we got into this mess? But the political consultants then kind of turn on the engines back up, and almost immediately everything whirs to life. All the ads go back on, and we pretend like almost nothing happened. I don't think there's anything politicians can do to lower the temperature, because there's going to be a demand both from the people who write checks to campaigns and from the grassroots who support political candidates to keep going hard after the other side. If you don't, we're not going to support you. Here's where we can make a difference as consumers, as voters of politics. We can begin to say, when you meet a politician on the street, when you go to their town hall meetings, as respectfully, could I ask you please not to run an ad talking about your opponent? Could you please, for the next 6 months, use the money that we send to your campaign to talk about what you want to do for the country, for the state, for the county, for the local borough? Tell us what you want to do for the community. Here's the other thing, and I think this goes to, you brought up the shooting a couple times in our conversation. This is a pretty classic example of where community around a young man, this 20-year-old shooter, collapsed. Yeah. He had no close friends, nobody in his contact list, wasn't a member of a church that we know. Nobody knew who he was. What happens when people live in isolation? First thing we can do is walk across the street, look at the person next to it, knock on the door and say, "You want to grab coffee? You want to walk in? Can I show you my garden? Would you like to go for a walk? Love to know you." We're not doing that, and it's creating a mystery around people who we should really be friends with.
Yeah, Jeff, I think it's a great piece of advice. And one of the things you said there is the idea that the onus of this isn't necessarily on our leaders, or isn't just on our leaders and elected officials, but the consumers, the voters bear a lot of this burden. Yeah. Voters aren't going to love hearing that. And the idea, there's a lot of push on Washington needs to be better. Washington needs to be better. Why is it that voters hold so much of this burden?
Well, first of all, politicians now are in our space 24 hours a day. Our social media feeds make sure that from the minute we wake up to the minute we go to bed, and then even in our dreams, political messaging is present. So when we wake up pretty hot. We're not getting rest. Tragically, many people all the way to the end of their lives in hospital rooms are watching cable news that's stoking their passions, and they're watching breaking news and red alerts. And people are not living peaceful, centered, content lives. So a message like this really says, I'm not telling people to turn off the news. I'm saying to demand a different kind of information that you can actually use to change your life, to help your neighbor out. We have to, as consumers, as voters, demand different, better choices. Politicians right now are almost just a reflection of the crowd. It's a crowd surfing exercise. Pollsters help a politician form convictions. And so if a crowd is still cheering, if the polls are showing there's no diminished support because the candidate is behaving badly, nobody pays any penalty for it. This really comes back to us. This really comes back to those of us who are in the stands. We've got to sometimes cross our arms and sit back and say, not going to cheer for that, not going to laugh at that joke, not okay.
Yeah. Jeff, one of the things about that is, people will come back and say, well, so-and-so said this, or so-and-so did this. And we saw this, right? The shooter in Butler, Pennsylvania, and then some Republicans immediately saying, okay, now we have to fight back. This has gone too far. But the reaction to these events, we see a lot of classy responses, a classy response from President Biden, a classy response from Governor Josh Shapiro, and then same as President Biden announces his withdrawal, classy responses from various Republicans. But we also see the immediate, this shooting is something orchestrated by the Biden administration, which many on the right said, or for those on the left, something like this is a false flag attempt.
Sure.
Why do we react like that, and how can we tamp down those reactions, or really just get rid of those reactions?
Yeah. Look, I think in part, I'm going to make this somewhat simple and take it out of the political context. So we used to call people who repeated gossip talebearers. You didn't want to be a gossip. It was always a bad thing in our political culture. The social media now has allowed us to be gossips, to be talebearers, without having any consequence. Nobody is looking at somebody who is posting a nasty meme. Nobody's looking at somebody who's posting something provocative, something speculative, something juicy, something salacious. Nobody is sending a private message to that person, say, hey, Cindy, hey, Joe, are you okay? What's going on? Did you verify that fact? Instead, with just a little punch, we can have an emoji that says, haha, funny, love that, don't like that. And what is happening now is that we've put a very low premium on words. We no longer believe that words are attached to meaning. We believe that there is meaning there is no meaning in words. We're adapting to the minute. So, look, I keep coming back to us, Sam, because I don't know of any way to change the political culture unless the people in the audience are acting differently. The founders, the framers, called it self-government. This whole experiment of a country only works when people are self-governed, when they control what comes out of their mouths. If we just become audience members in the Roman Colosseum and we're saying up and down, off with their heads, which is kind of what social media has become, we're at the tail end of a really wonderful story. We can renew the story if we begin to live lives that are self-governed and responsible, and that really means what comes out of our mouths.
Yeah, Jeff, that's an interesting point, because to your point earlier, we saw or we often see these things where the negative ads will come down for a weekend, where there will be calls for unity, and then it inevitably the pendulum swings back. And we quickly, I mean, you see right now in this moment in both campaigns, that heated rhetoric is right back to where it was before all of this craziness that we saw last month occurred. And what you're suggesting is that the answer is not necessarily to fix something broken in the political machine, but to actually, for us as individuals, to take our focus off of that, to really step out of that heated arena. Your advice of going to your neighbor, introducing yourself, buying them a cup of coffee, none of that is remotely political. Is this how we would really be able to keep civility in a prolonged sense of just absolutely removing it from the political sense? Stop trying to find a political answer to what's going on.
I think you answered the question, which is the solution is in neighborhoods, it's communities, people acting normal. Yesterday, I was a mom and her child broke down, didn't have any gas, ran out of gas. I went to get some gas. By the time I got back, this was 5 minutes, there were two other people that stopped. One was pushing, one brought his own gas can. And it was this little community that formed very quickly over a human need. America always does that when we're threatened externally. When the car breaks down, when there is a 9/11 moment, externally we rally. And you see congressmen, Republicans and Democrats standing on the steps of the Capitol singing God Bless America. I don't want it to have to be an external threat like that to unite a country. Our ideas, our values are big enough. And the big idea is, which is unique in many ways to America, is that people are made in the image of God. They deserve dignity and honor and respect, period. That covers a lot. There's a lot of grace if you live like that and talk like that, that it covers a lot of mistakes and a lot of errant political views. And by the way, people change their political views when they find someone who is respectful and will listen to them first about their grievances. Because we don't listen, we're not persuading a whole lot.
I think that's fantastic advice, Jeff. And as you know, some of that's worked in Washington in the halls of Congress. It's always interesting to me to see that those members are often a lot more civil to each other. They like each other a lot more than sometimes the pettiness that we can see in states across the country. And you know, it's interesting to your point that yes, as voters, we do bear the burden for this.
We do. You know, it's a heavy responsibility, but it's a responsibility of citizenship. It comes with being an American citizen. We don't, sadly, if you're born an American, you don't have to go through the exercise of becoming an American citizen. So you don't have to answer the questions. You don't have to have read the documents. You don't have to go through the process of explaining and defending why you want to leave one culture and join this one. But the notion of citizenship is a participatory one. We're not just customers. The vote, the exercise of voting, the exercise of participating in the life of the country, of seeing your congressman, your state representative, your state senator on the street and saying, hey, can I ask you about something? Respectfully, not throwing eggs, not offering death threats, not resorting to violence, but having a serious conversation about differences and then saying, hey, let's grab coffee.
Yeah, fantastic advice. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
Face the Issues is produced and recorded in the studios of Lighthouse TV. Positively different.
Welcome back to Face the Issues. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us and for your insights. For our viewers at home, you've seen Jeff on the show before. He has been an example and a mentor to me in my political career as a consultant, and someone that has modeled what he's saying. That's not just words for him. And one of the things, Jeff, that you're doing as you continue to model this is actually stepping in front of the camera a little bit more prominently and really trying to help shift that narrative when it comes to news. You are about to host the newest show on our network, Lighthouse TV, called Morning Light, a live TV show based out of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, our brand new studio over there. Tell us a little bit about Morning Light.
Well, it's a journey and a story that I had not planned or anticipated to do, but it's the idea that you could begin the day really not plunging into the news the way you traditionally do, but say, are there different questions or frame-ups around the big headlines of the day? And I have the great privilege of doing this program alongside a 30-year veteran of the industry, Emmy Award-winning journalist, Deborah Pinkerton. So we have the traditional rules and boundaries of how you ask difficult questions and make sure that you're not arriving at wrong conclusions. But for example, we're going to take an issue like the possibility that someone from Pennsylvania could ascend to the vice presidency and not look at it solely from the political dynamic of what does it mean to be in a swing state, but we'll say, what is the impact on a 51-year-old guy who's married, who has 4 children, who loves hanging out with his family and playing basketball? What is the implication to somebody who is a Jewish American in an environment when the toxicity of anti-Semitism is at an all-time high, at least for the last few decades? What about the disintegration of community? What does it mean when you see off-the-charts rise in depression and anxiety among almost every age category, this epidemic of loneliness that the Surgeon General has been describing? Hey, could we look at the news? Could we look at events differently? Could we bring in a conversation in the morning that doesn't just poke and prod at your sensibilities and leave you in a worse state than when you turned on on TV? That's really the purpose of Morning Light. I hope people will listen. I hope they'll join the conversation. And I hope, really, the prayer is that we'll be able to point to some permanent hope, which is a relationship with God. Because ultimately, there's no way you fix these big cultural schisms and kind of mend the country back together if you don't have people who really understand that, again, because people are made in God's image, they deserve to be loved. They deserve to be respected. So that's the premise of the show. 9 o'clock begins the middle of August, right here on Lighthouse TV and streaming across the country.
Yeah. And Jeff, just so our viewers know, that's 9 o'clock in the morning, right? We're going to start our mornings
9 o'clock in the morning. That's right. Yeah. Thankfully, it's not at 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning, so we can still get the kids off to school.
I love it, Jeff. You've been part of this network family for some time, and love that you're going to be coming in front of the camera more often than you have been on our show, on our friend Joe Watkins' show. Congratulations on the show. I'm looking forward to watching it myself. And thank you for really being the example, not just words, but the example of what all of us can aspire to be.
Well, thank you, Sam, and continue to look. You and I have been involved in the political campaigns, political life. It really does not feel like civility and kindness and statesmanship is on the rise. In fact, it feels like it's an anachronistic idea. But we have to keep chipping away one at a time, convincing people that this is a republic, an idea that's worth all the struggle, and civility is the way to get there.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Jeff, thank you again. My thanks to Jeff Coleman for joining us in this conversation. Of course, my thanks to each of you for tuning in as well. We hope to see you again right back here next week. Until then, my name is Sam Chen. On behalf of all of us here at Face the Issues, thank you and good night.